Fuzzy fucking math. I guarantee me just saying that skill name has already brought many emotions to every single FL4K player watching this video. Anger, disappointment, sadness, confusion, jealousy because Blightcaller ended up getting effectively fuzzy math on a tier 1 skill for only 3 points in fucking Wonderlands. All completely valid things to feel when thinking about or discussing fuzzy math. And because of all the emotions fuzzy math can bring, I feel like it makes a perfect candidate for this series, to discuss why it has the place in the meta that it does, how it could maybe be better, why I think it is probably a bit more of a nuanced situation than a lot of people tend to think of it as, which I mean, hey, could probably be said about a hell of a lot of things regarding FL4K. But let's dive on into why fuzzy math is the way the fuck it is. Fuzzy math is a tier 5 5-point skill within FL4K's Purple Tree. Whenever you or your pet scores a critical hit, both you and your pet will restore a portion of your shield. This effect has a 0.25 second cooldown, and the shield restoration is 3% per point, going from 3% at 1 point to 15% at 5. Fuzzy math, in a complete vacuum, just looking at the skill as it is, no other context surrounding it, is an absolutely fucking incredible skill and insane of a skill for FL4K to even have. FL4K is balanced very heavily around being a glass cannon. While FL4K does have a lot of defensive utility, very little of it is in actually keeping their health up. They can mitigate damage through aggro control, but in terms of actually mitigating the damage that FL4K takes, it's pretty much all health regen. This gives FL4K a pretty punishing playstyle overall. While you can do a shit ton of damage and are just constantly spitting out high DPS, if you take damage, you now have to change your game plan to make sure that you can get to a safe enough position to slowly regenerate that health back. If you've ever used the Queen's Call or a Moxie weapon or anything else that has lifesteal on it, you know that being able to bypass this is incredibly valuable for FL4K. If you just want to turn your brain off and play FL4K, I highly recommend the Heartbreaker. The game becomes infinitely easier when you do not have to worry about your health regen. And fuzzy math not only is throwing its hat into the ring here to be an alternate to health regen, it's doing it to FL4K shield specifically, meaning that this is even better than health regen because it can enable health sustain outside of health-based playstyles, giving FL4K access to sustain even when using the front loader or the deathless. And that right there is the specific reason that fuzzy math was even created. It was specifically made in response to those deathless and front loader builds because at the time that Purple Tree was being built and conceived, that was the most popular and one of the strongest playstyles for FL4K, using something to lower your health below the URAD threshold to utilize it for big damage. But because you couldn't really rely on health regen or even a health gate in this playstyle, you really had to heavily rely on just not taking damage as much as possible and using your high aggro control, which while very good, it could be a little bit tough and a bit frustrating at times. Therefore, this is where fuzzy math could step up and let you restore your shield. However, by the time that the Purple Tree's released, November 10th of 2020, because of the somewhat difficult nature of these sorts of builds and as well other things being added and changed, this meta began to shift and FL4K kind of started moving away from URAD. But it was still popular enough, and surely having access to fuzzy math would bring a resurgence to these types of builds, right? Well, this is when we have to now look at fuzzy math outside of that vacuum and within the context of the skill tree. As I said, this is a tier 5 skill. You have to effectively invest almost all the way down to the capstone to even put a single point into the skill. And while many times a single point is at minimum all you would really need to keep yourself alive very effectively, that is 21 points that have to be invested into the Purple Tree, a tree that really doesn't benefit FL4K himself all that much outside of fuzzy math, to give a build that is traditionally more FL4K focused better survivability. And that's at minimum, because while 3% every 0.25 seconds of hitting a crit is still pretty damn nice and likely can keep most builds alive, if you are running a build or weapons where maybe you're more in the fray, then you probably would want to put a couple more points into there. And again, this is at max a 5-point skill. It's it's pretty pricey if you did want to max it out. And it's not like it's worth maxing out to get to the capstone. We're talking about fucking capacitance here. You end up losing a hell of a lot of power just to have this survivability. But this survivability is very, very strong, and I think that this is where the nuance kind of lies. I think no matter what, fuzzy math was never going to be in a super satisfying spot. The proc condition is just way too easy for Flak, and having this type of survivability that isn't slow regen, it's instantaneous, is incredibly strong for Flak, once again because most of their balance comes from being a glass cannon DPS machine. A lot of people wish fuzzy math was higher up in Purple Tree, giving it more accessibility and letting more builds be able to utilize it without having to kneecap themselves to go so damn deep into purple. The problem with that is, if fuzzy math is too high up in the tree, then it becomes a defining trait that every single build ever is going to take, because again, a huge part of Flak's balance is being a glass cannon DPS monster. You take a character balanced heavily around not being able to be very survivable and give them an insanely good, easy to proc, instant source of healing, it's gonna be meta defining. Every single build is always going to take fuzzy math and probably completely ignore health regen, because you don't need health regen if your health is never even taking the damage. Because with fuzzy math, it becomes incredibly difficult for many damage sources to even punch through your shield and get to your health bar. You no longer have any need to play safe or play around your squishability, and in that, part of Flak's identity would be removed. But on the other hand, it does really, really fucking suck to have fuzzy math as deep as it is, because it completely condemns it to just being super fucking niche. Genuinely, it was never really worthwhile to use this in a URAD build just because of how much you ended up losing. So even at the time of URAD being more popular, fuzzy math itself still wasn't really used all that often unless you were kind of just not good at surviving. But as I mentioned, URAD was already falling out of favor by the time Purple Tree came out, and then 7 months after Purple Tree came out, URAD got nerfed to only being 100%, and while it's still very, very strong, it's not as strong as many other options for Flak are nowadays. But all that is to say, even for what this was created for, it being so deep in the tree still kept it niche and out of the build it was meant to be used with. Because effectively, for fuzzy math to be worthwhile, you need to be using a build that benefits heavily from you keeping your shield up, as well as doesn't get harmed by investing this heavily into Purple Tree. And I'm gonna be honest, this niche does exist, and fuzzy math is incredibly, incredibly strong within that niche, but man, does this still deserve to be used more often. Fuzzy math, I think, literally just needed to be moved up one more tier. I think there would still be a hell of a lot of people unsatisfied with that, but hear me out, okay? As I mentioned, I don't think there is ever going to be a satisfactory place to put it. If it's too high, it becomes way too centralizing, it becomes way too strong, and it removes part of Flak's identity. But I think high up is where most people wanted it. Too low is the problem we have currently, where it's just way too niche and super unusable and feels like dog shit to actually go down and get, despite its power level kind of necessitating it being pretty deep within the tree. But here's the thing, if you put it up one more tier, literally I think you would want to just swamp it with like not even a challenge, I think would make the most sense. It would only take 16 points to put a single point into fuzzy math. This is already far more reasonable, but it's still a pretty heavy investment. This allows you to still be able to fully invest into 2 other trees, get 2 capstones, and then you need to invest almost every other point into Purple Tree to get that 1 point into fuzzy math. This is still sacrificing a lot of your potential damage because blue, green, and red are all very high damage dealing trees, all 3 of which could make way better use of those 16 points, unless you don't need that DPS, and in that case, you can opt to instead go for the survivability route. At tier 4, there's still sacrifices to be made, and there's still interesting build opportunities with Flak. It still hurts to go down and get it, there is still a notable trade-off to it, but it's not so high that it becomes problematic and potentially identity ruining. But But, you know, that all being said, Blightcaller got Wraith Mail at tier 1, which has no cooldown and restores 7% per point on kill, as well as only being a 3-point skill. So yeah, I don't know, fuck me, I probably think about balance and character identity more than Gearbox does at this point. That's gonna about do it for this one though. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all that. I'll be live right after this video goes up, right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel where you can follow to be notified of when I go live, and just below that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.